Hello friends, this is Arushi and today we are going to learn about chapter first of the class 8th history textbook, that is how, when and where. So let's move on to this chapter. Now, how important are the dates? We usually associate history with dates. Whenever we think about history, we think it's all about dates. There's nothing else to read in history. But there was a time when historians were so obsessed and fascinated with dates. That is why we have a perception about this, that dates are so important in history. There were heated debates about the dates on which rulers were crowned or battles were fought. In the common sense notion, history was synonymous with dates. As long before as we have studied history, we were all having this perception that if we study history, it'll be about dates. It'll be about a timeline that all the events occurred and everything, when a ruler was crowned or when the royal baby was born. So it was all about dates, but not anymore. We have to read history from a perception that is not only attached to dates, but there are certain other things as well. There are certain patterns, there are certain characteristics which happened in certain era. There are timelines which show us how we have moved from a past, how we have gone towards the future. So let's see that what other things are incorporated in the history. Now, history is about finding how things were in the past and how things have changed. It is not just about dates, but it is also about what happened in an era previous to this one. What happened when it was 1980s? What happened when it was 1880s? What happened when it was 1780s? So it's not just about the date, the year. It's also about what happened and what consecutively has been happening towards this date, till this date. When we compare the past, the present, time becomes before and after. When we are comparing our past with our present, the timeline varies. It varies because certain things that happened that time is not happening this time. Certain things that are there in the present day were not there in the past. So basically, history is not just about the timelines, it is also about the various events that happened in those timelines. It's also about the characteristics of those timeline events that happened. Here we see the picture of Brahmins offering the Shastra to the Britannia. Now, this picture has a very a very significant role in determining what are the perceptions of those who wrote history. So, see, history is not just accounts of all the events unbiased. It has a certain level of biasness in it. If I'm writing history, I will be writing from my perspective. But if some other person is writing history, that history will be from his perspective. So basically, if we see both the histories together, certain events may match, but certain events may have different conclusions than mine or the other person. So this picture, it shows us about the perception of the person who wrote this, who showed this in the historical textbooks. It showed that this picture has significance because it showed that Indians, they were they were willing to give their nation to the Britishers so as to modernize this and to civilize this nation, because they thought that Indians were incapable of having growing towards civilization for on their own. So that is how the perception changes. Obviously, Indians might not have thought that giving the nation to the Britishers will have modernization or civilization aspect. They might be seeing that as an encroachment, but Britishers saw it as a willing contribution, as a willing offer to the Britishers to rule their country. Moving on, sometimes it is actually incorrect to fix precise dates to processes that happen over a period of time. Now we know the processes of industrialization, the colonization, it did not happen at a certain day. When we read that industrialization in England happened in the 19th century, we do not prescribe a certain date to it. We obviously add a period over the time because it happened over a course of time. The Mughal Empire happened over a course of time. Then the colonization happened over a course of time. The independence, the War of Independence happened over a course of time. So basically, it is incorrect to fix a very, very precise and very, very fixed date to certain events because it has been happening for a very long time in order to, characterize those events in particular. There is no single date on which British rule was established or the national movement started. All these things happened over a stretch of time. There can be no fixed, precise date for a movement to occur. The freedom struggle, for example, did not happen in one day. It took years. The First World War, the Second World War, it did not happen at one day. It took years. Of course, it ended on a certain day, which we can prescribe a certain date on what date it ended. But we cannot prescribe, a certain date to which the war continued. It continued for a period of time, and we have to study for that period of time. How did the event occurred and how did it went? We can only refer to a span of time over which particular changes became visible. So the changes are happening gradually. Changes are happening every day. But when that change occurs over a significant period of time, and then it forms certain characteristics because of which we can characterize that period into something. We can name the period into an event. That period becomes important for us. That period holds significance for us. Like for example, we take the example of the First World War. So the First World War was, happening over a very continuous period of time. But we call the spark when Archduke Ferdinand was, shot, assassinated. So that is the period from which we take the First World War as the beginning, how it started to begin. So some events in the history create a lot of importance, and from that event we memorize or we recognize the period or the event that happened that time. Here is a poster of an advertisement that happened in the early 1700s or 1800s. It's of Lipton's tea. We can see here the Indian background, Indian royalty in the background, and then here is Queen Victoria's third son, Arthur, Prince Arthur. So we can very well, assume, we can very well predict that this Lipton's tea wanted to, showcase that this tea is, being used worldwide by the royalties. So because there's royal figure, and obviously it is very easy to, recognize that royalties use this tea worldwide. It shows that period of time, how important it was for the people to, see the life of the royalties, how they're living, and, aspire from that. So people tried to advertise in their way. That becomes important for us. So why do we learn dates really? There was a time when history was an account of battles and big events. It was about rulers and their policies. Historians wrote about the year a king was crowned, the year he married, the year he had a child, the year he fought a particular war, the year he died, and the year the next ruler succeeded to the throne. So, for example, if we take the Mughal era, that was personally my favorite chapter of the medieval history. We take the history of all the kings that were there in the Mughal era. Started from Babur, ended on Aurangzeb. Then there was Bahadur Shah Zafar as well. But we take account of all the battles that were fought by the Mughals, how the next king succeeded the first one, and how the king was crowned, and how Akbar was born and his son Salim was born. So there is all the events that were associated with the king, the crowning, the birthing, and then the fights and everything. But there's a flaw in that. There's a loophole in that. Why? Because we only know about how those kings lived, how the royalties functioned. We did not know about how the people actually were living, how how the livelihood was going, what were the crops, and what was the conditions of the economy, the society. So history can be, as I said earlier, history can be very biased from the account of person who is actually writing the history. It may not include everything, but it can only include the things which the person considered important during that time. So that creates the biasness in history. For events such as these, specific dates can be determined, and in history, debate about dates continue to be important. Dates are obviously important because dates, give us the very idea about when and how the things happened at a particular period of time. At the time of hunter gatherers, we do not have a very prescribed and detailed account, a written account of what happened during those times. We have a very vague period which we can assign to them, that those people used to live between these periods, and these were the things that happened during that time. These were the crops that were that must have been there. So but we cannot determine the dates, the particular dates on which certain events happened. So debate about dates continue to happen till date. Historians look at how people earned their livelihood, what they produced and ate, how cities developed and markets came up, how kingdoms were formed and new ideas spread, and how cultures and societies changed. So before, when everything in history was about royalty, after a certain period of time, historians they gradually realized that it should not be just about the royalties. It should also be about the people who made the kingdom. It should also be about the geographical conditions. It should also be about the economical, the societal conditions, what used to happen at that time, how the normal people had their livelihood going on, how were the economy during that time. So these all events, create together. When they come together, they create a history of that event. They create the history of that time. Of course, timeline is important, because of the timeline we can differentiate between how the world has been progressing, how the particular flora and fauna, how the particular sources, how the people are progressing towards this day. So it cannot happen that one day we started liking tea, and we cannot imagine of a time that there was not tea. People did not used to consume tea. People liked consuming tea. People discovered tea over a period of time, and now we cannot imagine a time where people did not consume tea. So of course, this timeline is very important towards seeing that what are the gradual changes that has been happening towards the beginning of the time. Which dates are important? These dates become vital because we focus on a particular set of events as important. Consider an example. In the histories written by British historians in India, the rule of each Governor General was important. These histories began with the rule of the first Governor General, Warren Hastings, and ended with the last Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten. So, as I said earlier, there can be different perceptions towards what a historian is writing. If I was someone of the British era and I was a Britisher, I would obviously focus on what the present Governor General or the Viceroy have been doing in their reign. So that was important for me, because I was a Britisher and I wanted to see what are all the things this Governor General is doing, and I would see the difference that the first Governor General is doing, the second Governor General is doing. I would, make an account, and I would compare those things. So as a Britisher, that is important for me. But as a Britisher, I might not think about the common people, the commoners. How are the commoners, taking response? How are the commoners giving response to those policies these Governor Generals had? So obviously that is also important, but the importance is based on perception. My way of percepting something is important can be differ from other historian. So it obviously became very, very difficult to distinguish what is important towards a single person's point of view. Moving on, all the dates in these history books were linked to the Governor Generals, to their activities, policies, and achievements. The chronology of their lives marked the different chapters of the history of British India. So British India had a very biased sense of history, because it all revolved around the lives of the Governor General and how they had their activities, how they introduced policies, and how they gained their achievements. It all revolved around how their reign was functioning, how their reign was working. So obviously it did not give us the account of the other people. It did not give us the account of what was the economical situation. It gave certain perspective which was based from their account. So that is the problem. But that point of view is also important for us to see that what were actually the ideas that they wanted to incorporate. If we see an account which is only from the perception of people, then we will see only the perception of people towards, seeing the policies and percepting the policies from their point of view. We would not see why those policies were implemented and what was the reason behind these policies being implemented. So that is also important, of course. This is a picture of Warren Hastings when he became the first Governor General of India. Now, this picture shows us. This picture can be perceived in various ways. First, it can from this picture we can obviously perceive that he was a strong man. From his biography, we can biographers can glorify his life in whatsoever way they can. And from his accounts of policies, achievements, and activities, we can see that what all he had done during his reign, during his period in which he was the Governor General. Moving on, in the histories that revolve around the life of British Governor Generals, the activities of Indians have no space. Of course, the activities of only the Britishers and the Governor Generals were important from that point of view, because people were only, that time historians, the British historians were only interested in comparing the accounts of the Governor Generals and seeing what all achievements the Governor General is acquiring in a new foreign land. So obviously the activities of the commoners, the activities of the Indian citizens, the people of India did not matter to them much, because the policies that were implemented by these governor generals held more importance in their mind rather than the people who were to go through these policies. What then do we do? We need another format for our history. Of course, we do need to see what all the things were happening from the people's side as well. We do not need only one account. We need certain accounts to formulate what actually is the history during that time. The old dates will no longer have the significance they earlier had. A new set of dates will become more important for us to know. So for the British historians, let's take an example of this. For British historians, the day Governor General implemented a certain policy is important. So they will write about that date. But for the citizens, the date they started getting affected from that policy, that date will become important for them. Like we see the first War of Independence, 1857. It did not come into the eyes of British until there was this Sepoy mutiny. So before that, they might not have the account. But for the Indians, for the Sepoys or for the mutineers that were there in the past, for them, these set of events must have been, occurring at a gradual pace. So for their account of history, it'll have, a much longer account of details, a much long timeline than the British historians, because from their eyes, the Sepoy mutiny happened only when Mangal Pandey refused to take scratch the bullet, and he was hanged. From their perspective, that was the beginning of the First War of Independence. But from the account of those who participated in the First War of Independence as Indians, their journey began much earlier than the spark which Mangal Pandey did. Why do we periodize? So periodization of history is really very important. Like how we, chapterize all the important chapters. Like when we study history book, we do not read the history book as a novel. There are certain chapterization. There is certain events which are in a particular head. Then there are other events which are in another head. So we periodize history in order to capture the characteristics of a time, its central features as they appear to us. Like in chemistry, we know about the characteristics of acid, bases, and salt in a chapter. But in another chapter, we learn about the characteristics of organic elements. So obviously there are differences. The chapterization is different. The characteristics are different. So similarly in history also, we try to capture the characteristics of a certain period, like what all the characteristics were similar in one period, then it gradually changed in other period, and then it gradually changed further in some other period. So we try and compile them into certain periods, and that is why periodization is very important. So the terms through which we periodize, that is demarcate the difference between periods, become important. It is very important for us to demarcate the history that is presented before us. Like we periodize between ancient, medieval, and modern history. Why is it important for us to periodize these periods? Because it is important for us to recognize the characteristic that happened in the ancient, medieval, and the modern history. In ancient history, we were more interested about how the crops were grown and what all crops were grown, what were the areas which were developed, what all areas had regular water supply, what all kingdoms that grew during that time. In medieval history, we have a more structured system because people began writing accounts. There was much detail about how the Mughal functioning worked, how how the economy was there during that time, what all rulers came. And then in the modern history, of course, there is colonization of India, and then how we gained independence, how it gradually happened over a period of time. So that is how we categorize, and it is important for us to categorize, to capture, to learn about the characteristics about how a period happened, what are the events that happened, and how they all can be compiled in a particular set of events. Moving on, how do we periodize? In 1817, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, published a history of British India. In this, he divided Indian history into three periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. This periodization came to be widely accepted. According to his telling of history, before the British came to India, Hindu and Muslim despots ruled the country. Religious intolerance, caste taboos, and superstitious practices dominated the social life. British rule, Mill felt, could civilize India. Now, here is an account of history from the eyes of James Mill, who was a Scottish economist and political philosopher. His way of categorizing, his way of periodizing India into different historical events was Hindu, Muslim, and British. Hindu, of course, when Hindu rulers reigned, Muslim when the Muslim rulers reigned, and British when the British came over and colonized India. This was widely accepted by the, we can call them layman, this was widely accepted by the Britishers as well as the layman, because with their eyes it was, easy to categorize from the point of view of the royalty which presided. But it was not the case, right? Because people, all kinds of people, all the religious sects resided there as well. We cannot categorize a particular point in history where only rulers are there. Of course, rulers have to rule on someone, and there are subjects which are there, and the subjects are not only Hindus or Muslims, there are certain various subjects which are there. To categorize a certain period based on religion is very superstitious in their own language, is very orthodox way of categorizing into Muslim, Hindu, and British period. This periodization might be widely accepted, but we can see how this categorization is flawed in its own ways, because from their eyes they could categorize into these things, but a major flaw which they overlooked or which they ignored was all kinds of people resided there. The history is not just explained by the royalties that happened, it also is explained by the subjects who had those royalties in the kingdom at the first place. So obviously, this kind of system might be accepted, but it is flawed. He also says that British could civilize India. Now, there's another point of view, of course. Mill, or maybe a very long list of Britishers, they thought that India was not civilized before the British came, that India was not modernized as the Europe was. But we all know that how colonization happened and what are the reasons that colonization can give to throw in the morality ground. Civilization cannot be an excuse to colonize a certain area. It cannot be an excuse to call all the other rulers that presided before them despotic, because those rulers also had kingdom. The modernity might not go at pace with the European kingdom, but of course we had our culture before the Europeans came. And gradually we might have gone into a certain era as well. But of course, this is from his account. He thought that Britishers could civilize India in a more pragmatic, in a more progressive way. So he gave this account. To do this, it was necessary to introduce European manners, arts, institutions, and laws in India. Mill, in fact, suggested that the British should conquer all the territories in India to ensure the enlightenment and happiness of the Indian people. According to Mill, British rule represented all the forces of progress and civilization, whereas the period before British rule was of darkness. Now, we can see from this account that what all kinds of progressive and positive things this person is thinking about the Britishers. Of course, he's thinking that Britishers should conquer all the territories in order to bring happiness to the people, in order to show them a better life, in order to show them enlightenment and laws and European manners and institutions. But from the account of an Indian, it might be seen as an encroachment. It might be seen an encroachment to their culture, to their way of living. because of course these were foreigners, and when foreigners come to your land and try to rule in their own way, we of course do not accept it as our own culture, as our own institution. We are not free to raise our voices. So whatsoever reasons the Britishers can give, whatsoever reasons the Indians can give that the Britishers did not come for civilization, it all happened in history, and historians might have different perspectives. So periodization can occur in a very, very different ways. Mill periodized in this format, and Indian historian might periodize in some other format. So that is why the periodization, and how do we periodize? How do we, because periodization also shows us the perception of the people. Like we obviously know now about James Mill. We know how he thought about India before Britishers came to India. We know how he thought that Britishers could make improvements in India. So we know about his perception. We know about his way of looking at India. We know about his way of seeing India getting to light and coming out from darkness.